We now move to our second panel, Jnanam Vijnanam Astikyam, Command of the Commons, AI, Innovation and Democratic Advantage. As we see that democracy is raised to harness artificial intelligence, an important question emerges. How do countries collaborate on such powerful technologies while still protecting their sensitive capabilities? And for that, our next session explores the balance and how it can be achieved. To help us unpack these questions, we are joined by an excellent panel of speakers. May I now invite our panelists to join us on stage. Please welcome Dr. Wiebke Winter, member of the Presidium, CDU Germany, Mr. Ankit Mehta, CEO, Idea Forge Technology Private Limited, Mr. Sven Clement, Member of Parliament, Luxembourg, and part of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly delegation, and Ms. Sophie Briquetti, Political Officer on Partnerships and Cooperation, NATO Headquarters. To steer this conversation, we are joined by Ms. Urmi Tat, Manager, Public Policy and Government Affairs, South Asia, Salesforce. Without further ado, I'll now hand over the floor to Ms. Urmi.
Hello? Oh, great. Fantastic. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Urmi. I look at public policy for Salesforce in South Asia, which means I'm constantly grappling with the questions of technology and policy and how they collide and how they interact. So it's my pleasure to therefore moderate this session full of experts on this matter. So our session is quite a mouthful. The topic is command of the commons. And historically, how we understand commons is through space, land, water, oceans. But today we're faced with a new frontier, which is digital. And so that involves data, that involves AI, infrastructure. That's the new commons, in fact. So what we're talking about is the democratic advantage, which is the belief that open societies like India and NATO can innovate better if they have shared values. The question really is that, can we move together? Can we move at the pace in which technology is working? And can we do this together? So to join me in this discussion, we've got a great panel. Dr. Wiebke Winter, member of the State Parliament of Bremen and member of the Presidium CDU Germany. Pleasure to have you. Mr. Ankit Mehta, CEO of Idea Forge, Mr. Sven Clement, Member of Parliament, Luxembourg, and Sophie Briquetti, Political Officer, Partnerships and Cooperation, NATO. Pleasure to have you all. So just to start off, I wanted to start with a quick icebreaker. So just to check your pulse on the matter. So in less than 60 seconds, can you let us know of an AI-driven innovation that has inspired you or surprised you in the last year? Sven, I'll start with you.
Thank you. It's always tough to start. Thinking about what AI did over the last year is, I think, the sheer speed with which it has gained users, but then at the same time, the lack of penetration in the general public. So all of those who have already used AI, we have seen data coming out of all the AI researchers that in the end, only a tiny sliver of the population uses it to a full extent. A few are using it a bit, like replacing Google and asking it to summarize a document. And the vast majority, over 80% of the general population who has access to the internet, has not even touched consciously an AI tool. So what astonishes me is that at the same time a technology can penetrate that quickly, but at the same time leave 4 in 5 people still behind. And I think that should give us pause to thought.
Thank you so much for having me. I think 2 things connecting to AI were quite memorable for me. So the first thing is you just mentioned the speed of it all. I think it's so impressive, but also frightening how you can shape videos and pictures with AI. I can just give AI a picture of myself and I can put myself into just any surrounding. And I know that if I do it for myself, it's probably in a good context. But what scares me is how many videos have also been made of people who didn't want that, people in a maybe compromising situation, maybe even naked videos of people who aren't naked in real life, or which is just fake and which has taken a toll on so many people. And I think this worries me because we are so much slower than AI as a regulator. And the second thing is just the difference of how people use AI. You just briefly mentioned it, and I want to add on that by saying that more than 90% of the pupil in Germany, they use AI, and more than 80% use it to learn and for school. And when I think of how my grandparents are using technology right now, I'm quite proud of them that they are using WhatsApp, and I can call them via WhatsApp, and I think they are so cool that they just use everything. But at the same time, of course, I know that's a whole different story, and therefore I think these are the two things that have impressed me most positively and negatively during the last 12 months.
So, one of the points that Sven made was regarding the lack of diffusion of the technology, that sufficient people are not using. So I wanted to share an example that I recently encountered, or how at really fast speed a lot of diffusion is also happening in pockets. So Ministry of Information and Technology recently hosted a competition alongside Drone Federation of India for students to build drones that can do a very specific task. They were to be given any random plot of land. They have to fly over that land, detect humans who could be placed anywhere in that patch of land, and then go and deliver a specific medical aid box to them. And close to about 351 teams, each comprising of close to 10 plus students. So a pretty large number of student population from across the country attempted, and about 5 to 6 teams did the job with a single click of the button. They just were given a file, they have to upload that file, click a button, and they were able to get over the line to do that job. So I think there's a lot of promise that the diffusion will happen, and it will happen pretty fast, and we will be able to do complex and advanced capabilities with the technology. And the other example that I recently was really surprised and happy about was how it is now going to be able to empower whoever of us chooses to make our life easy or to build an application. I'm sure some people would have at least done vibe coding in this room. Has anybody done vibe coding? Just a quick pulse check. Awesome, right? I mean, if you've done vibe coding, that you know that we are entering a completely new world. Any one of us can build an application that we earlier thought is work of IT engineers, if I may, or computer science. But now, I mean, just sit on a computer, talk to it, and you can build an application. It's just mind-blowing, and it's really going to change how we are working and how even our education system is going to evolve going forward, where maybe finally the priority in the education system around computer science and IT will probably come down a little bit, and people will focus on learning the other sciences as well a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. One very quick example for me is something that happened to me in India 2 days ago. I needed something urgently. I was in a restaurant, it was 10 p.m. And an Indian friend of mine told me, oh, you need this thing, then I'm going to go onto that app and order it for you. In the space of 30 seconds, that product was purchased, and within the next 10 minutes, I had it delivered at 10 p.m. For something that I would never have thought I would have had that product. So I don't know if this is AI as such or because maybe it predates AI, but what I know is that when I wanted to look out quickly about that application, I just wrote, a question on my phone, and AI in the space of 1 second allowed me to know all I wanted to know about that app in a very clear manner. So that's my one example for you related to India, which also speaks to the potential of the economy of India. And I don't even know if that exists in Europe, those quick commerce apps to that extent, but something to think about for sure.
Well, it's great to hear the range of perspectives, but I think something that's common to what everybody highlighted here was both the advantage, the opportunities of AI, and also the risks. And I think that leads me to my next question on this idea of a temporal mismatch, where AI is developing in weeks, in hours, and when we look at legislation, we look at governance, that often takes years, months. So we call that somewhat of a temporal mismatch where the rule books are outdated even before they're printed. Wiebke, if I can start with you. In your experience, how can legislations, regulations, governance be a lot more adaptive, more dynamic? And one of the examples is the EU AI Act, which I'd love for you to talk about. And it took about perhaps 4 years to formulate. And the technology that it was going to regulate had probably outpaced it by the time it was out. And we face similar issues all over the world where we're trying to find the right governance mechanism. What has been your experience with this? How can governance, how can legislation keep up with AI's pace?
I think I could talk about this for the whole night, but let me just point to some criteria that I think is very substantial for all of this. So let me first start with what is the AI Act? For everybody that's not familiar with EU legislation. EU legislation is, in my experience, particularly slow because there are so many member states who all need to agree on that. Then there's European Parliament, then there are the national governments, and everybody wants to have a say in it. So actually, I was in the Ministry of Health at that point when we talked about the AI Act. So I was even able to give some insight and some input into the AI Act, but I also know how difficult and complicated it is to get an act in the EU done. And how long it takes for everybody to agree on it, especially on an act which translates directly into national law. So you don't have to have another regulation. It's not setting the scene for this AI Act, but it is applicable directly. And I think, of course, there's always the difficulty how to deal with new technology. And you could say, well, maybe we don't need to regulate it. And this could be one option. But I think what the EU did wasn't that stupid. There is sometimes stupid legislation, but not always. And I think that we need to point out here that they were quite clever in seeking a criteria that will be there for a longer period of time. And what they did is, this is the first act to ever regulate AI. This is quite a brave thing to do. And they did so quite early when AI was completely different from now. And what they did is that they took this risk-based approach to AI. So they are saying, okay, how risky is AI? What does it deal with? Not with the technology in itself, how far developed it is. And then it classified the different forms of AI regarding on what it addresses. So, for example, if you're having biometric data, this is rather a high-risk form of AI, and there are even forms of AI that are forbidden then, because we don't want to live in a state that can totally control its citizens. Me coming from Germany, I'm almost 30 now, so I didn't live through the two Germanys. But of course, in my family and in my nation's history, there was a state which controlled everybody in a very, very great detail. And there wasn't even AI present then. So it is data protection and the protection of freedom, that you're not controlled all the time, is something that's really dear to many Germans' hearts and also to my heart as well. And I think this risk-based risk-based criteria is something that we can learn from, but of course it is quite old. And if you think about how long this takes and how technology has evolved since then, I wrote my PhD thesis on AI. It was actually called Big Data and AI. Nobody talks about big data anymore. It's completely outdated to talk about that. But I wrote it in 2019 and I finished it in 2021. So you see how fast things get outdated. And of course, this is the same thing for legislation. And we are seeing that it is very important, if we come back to the security level, to be sovereign as the European Union, as our multilateral state that we have built as the European Union. And of course, it's also important not to over-regulate, because you still want innovation to happen in the European Union and not only in China and the US, for example. But we want to be sovereign in ourselves and not rely on everything else. And I think that maybe we've overdone it a little bit, same as in data protection, because I use ChatGPT now all the time. It knows everything about me. And that's probably not good, but I admit to that, I think. And we also need to talk more about how we use AI, because I feel that I always try to have a discussion with my friends. How do you use AI? How do you use it? And how do you deal with everything? And I think we need to talk more about how we use AI. And at least that's something that within my circles is not done often enough. And I think we need to adapt really quickly and also learn more about it. But legislation will always be a problem for new technologies, yes.
Wiebke, sorry, can I ask you a follow-up?
Yes, sure.
So when you talk about a risk-based approach, it would be great if you could elaborate for us what that looks like, because India is also thinking about how do you classify risk? What's high risk? What needs to be governed? And in your experience, it would be great to know how the EU's done it, and if there are potential areas of collaboration between India and the EU.
Sure, I just got out my phone because I wrote it down here because I don't have the whole AI Act memorized and I don't want to say something wrong. So there are 4 risk classes that have been established within the EU, and one is a risk that is forbidden. So for example, social scoring is something that is forbidden in the EU. So this is, as far as I know, happens in China. If you don't visit your parents during a day that you should visit your parents, you're not allowed to take trains anymore. But also, it is a real example. Yeah, well, so manipulative AI that can influence people a lot is also forbidden. I mean, we could talk about how TikTok is doing that or not, but TikTok isn't forbidden yet in the EU. Then there is the second classification is high risk AI, which has very strict regulation. This is, for example, applied to medical products. So anything that is also affecting your body, but also for critical infrastructure or the educational system. And then if you have a lower risk, you just have certain duties to be transparent about the use of AI. And for example, if it's just really helpful and there isn't really a risk to the freedom or the body or to anything personal. For example, spam filters. I mean, I love my spam filter. It helps me a lot not to get too many emails. Then there isn't really a regulation. Or for example, if you just get certain kind of advice from something, but it's not very influential. So these are the 4 classifications that we have used as the EU to classify AI.
Thank you, Wiebke. Sven, if I could get your opinion on this as well. How do you see legislations being more adaptive or dynamic with the pace of AI? And are you conscious of over-regulation at all?
So once I'm back in Europe tomorrow morning, I'll be at home for about a day, and then I'll be driving to Paris on Tuesday evening to the OECD. And I still remember sitting in that exact same room we'll be in on Wednesday, 7 years ago, when we discussed about AI regulation on OECD level. So we see that every multilateral organization, whether it's the EU, NATO, the OECD, has tried to grapple with what AI is to start with. And just the examples that Wiebke mentioned show how diverse the use of AI is, but also how diverse the definition is. When we speak about spam filters, we can speak about AI, or we can say this is purely a statistical phenomenon that we are using. The bias filter, for an example. This is obviously something that nowadays we classify as AI. A few years back, we would have said, oh yeah, that's applied statistics. Good for you, you should do math at university. Then other uses of AI go far beyond what we've used to in the past. So I think it's really good that most legislation we've seen until now is very agnostic to the technology behind it. The moment we try to regulate specific technology, it becomes a very slippery slope, because by simply changing a few parameters, we can evade regulation completely. So it's very important that we are broad and then are trying to regulate in a way that is future-proof. Laws take a long time to be changed. And once we have them, we don't tend to abolish them anymore. There's currently a wave in the European Union going on, getting rid of a few other directives and regulations. But in the end, if you speak to a politician, and I'm looking at my Indian colleague here, we write laws, we rarely abolish them. So obviously, if we regulate AI, we should be doing it in a way that is future-proof, where we know that this is not something that is like, oh yeah, we will regulate GPTs. We will regulate exactly this algorithm, because maybe tomorrow it will not be LLMs anymore, it will be small language models, as you mentioned, or it might be something completely different. I still remember the time we spoke about convolutional networks, recursive neural networks. There are a lot of terms that we've learned over the last few years that are not relevant anymore in the times of LLMs, but they might come back. So better be technological agnostic. And maybe coming to the NATO question of that element, I wrote 2 reports, one on AI and one on uncrewed warfare. The one on AI is similar to what we just talked about. Take a risk-based approach and keep the human in the loop. Human in the loop, on the loop, next to the loop, there are a lot of nuances on that as well. I'm always saying the human should somehow dance around the AI and not the AI around the human. We should have some human intelligence still be linked to decisions being made by the AI. And we need to be aware that we can't have a system where in the end it is computer says no or computer says yes. Because we've seen that in trials, we've seen that in psychological studies. Somebody sits in front of a computer, the computer makes a recommendation. What is your initial reaction? Yes, computer is right. The computer is always right because obviously he knows more. The computer has seen more data, has digested more data. In warfighting, that becomes very, very dangerous when you take automated decisions. So we need to have a human element somewhere in that decision chain. The same is true for decisions on banking. Do you get a loan or not? Do we really want that to be 100% automated? Great for productivity, great for the economy, initially, until we see that it doesn't work for everybody. And especially the bigger the country, the bigger the population, the more precise we need to be. So I would always say, keep a human somewhere around that AI decision and train the operators to be strong enough to resist the urge to always click accept, accept, accept. This is not an end-user license agreement that nobody read and still accepts. This might actually impact human lives. So we should be a bit more concerned about what the computer proposes to do and then react accordingly.
Thank you, Sven. And I think what you said about being legislations or regulations being technologically agnostic is something that is also shared with India's guidelines on AI as well, where we're trying to look at the risk or the harm rather than governing the technology itself. So it's always a delicate balance when we look at balance between innovation and governance. I was wondering if this is something that you regularly face in your line of work, and how do you make a pro-innovation legislation?
If I would put my libertarian hat on, I would say no regulation is best for business and for innovation, because then you don't need to follow any rules and you can do whatever you think is best. Being a legislator, I know that that's wrong. It is not the best environment for innovation in a system where there are no rules. We need rules to work, to function, to have a working society. So now the question is, which rules do we need? And I think that's a balance every country, every bloc is handling slightly different. The US goes a long way to say, we don't want to regulate AI at all, because if we regulate it, innovation will not happen. The EU went another way and said, we will regulate AI in a way that we have a risk-based or do no harm approach, which I personally, coming from that same philosophy, agree with. Now the question is how difficult to pass that regulation should be. And I think there we are not doing enough. We are still not explaining regulation well enough to small and innovative companies. Very often we use the same language for a small company than for a big company. That also applies in defense, as an example, where we very often see small companies, small middle companies not being able to participate in procurement processes, in innovation processes, for the simple reason because they don't understand or don't have the human resources to dedicate to parsing hundreds and hundreds of pages of legalese. This is not English we are writing, let's be honest. I'm not a lawyer, but those texts are written from lawyers for lawyers, probably nowadays with the help of AI, and not for the normal citizen, the entrepreneur in the trenches who wants to do something. So we need to have, next to the legal text, maybe shorter and easy to digest explanations on what those texts actually mean in practice. The legal term for that is regulatory sandboxes, where we enable people to do stuff that they otherwise probably couldn't do and then see, does it fit or not? Let's let innovation happen and help innovation to understand what the rules of the game are. Instead of saying, first you learn about the rules and then try to find a way to work inside the rules. Let's maybe see what is the innovation and now how can we fit that into our rules-based order, because that's maybe more interesting and we might even see where our rules are falling short of the ambition that we put ourselves up to.
Thank you, Sven. I think that was a great articulation of some very practical ways in which we look at innovation-based legislation. If I can move on to the collaborative element of this discussion, when we think about democratic advantage, NATO and India need their tech to talk to each other, whether it comes to drones or when we talk about data sharing. And in the real world, that collaboration is a lot more difficult than we think it is. So, Ankit, you build the hardware that makes all of this possible. And we often talk about international collaboration and, NATO and India should find those NATO countries in India should find those commonalities and common grounds to collaborate when it comes to AI and innovation. But we have a very strong trend of digital sovereignty all around the world. And we often find that collaboration and digital sovereignty are pitted against each other. So for you, or for your company, what does successful collaboration between India and NATO look like in these times of closeness and digital sovereignty?
Absolutely. So before I answer that question, I have two very small questions. One is to Vivi. Did I get that right? Yeah. So one question is that how much AI did you use for the AI law? How much AI did you use for the AI law itself?
I didn't use AI back then because it was, I think it was in 2021 or 2022. So I didn't use ChatGPT by then. So I only used my head. Maybe it would have been better to use AI, right? But you shouldn't ask the frog
that's
when
the
you're
answer to
trying
get it done
to
faster now.
get the lake drowned. Yeah.
And the other 2 points that I wanted to make on AI regulation, one is that I feel like a lot of times we can get overwhelmed by what's going to change. But there is a question to answer that what's not going to change, and maybe the rule should be made around what's not going to change. And I think that would give us a little bit faster method of arriving at. For example, the risk-based approach is probably one of the ways to say that we will always look at some things in one way or the other in terms of its relative importance to us, and therefore those are the things that don't change. So I think that could be a way of moving it faster along, because it's going to be very hard to model it on what's going to change, because we just don't know. Like Urmi had said, it'll probably, by the time you get to the signing block, it's already evolved and we are not getting there. And the second piece, which worries me actually more than the first piece of policy, is that building a regulation that has prohibition in it for a few things, in my opinion, is going to be a very difficult situation, because only if a part of the world is adopting it, then some parts of the world will evolve in that direction. Naturally, people who want to do that will incline and move towards that part of the world. And therefore, even if do no harm is an important objective for humanity, that's not how, even for example, a military alliance like NATO would look at AI. I mean, even for NATO, the element of how to cause harm or cause deterrence is going to be an important vector to think about when you look at using AI. And I think every military in the world will use that. So I think that's one question that I grapple with a lot. So it's something for the room and for you guys to shed more light on if you have more thoughts. But that's one of the problems, I believe, that we can make the rules, but are they harming us more than helping us in the long term for some of the objectives that we may have? So, and exactly in that light, Urmi, I think when you look at data sharing, right? First, let me come to the elements that have become very stark globally. And these, all in these last few years, we've seen too many examples of people using both hardware and software to cause harm or to prevent other countries and other organizations to do things. We have seen denial of service now. We have seen the pagers explosion using supply chain attacks. We have seen a lot of cross-pollination of technology. We may talk a lot about China helping Russia, but China is also helping Ukraine in all the drones that Ukraine is building. So there is a lot of supply chain related challenge that exists out there. And the first order of business when we look at collaboration is that element of trust in what we are collaborating on. If we have to adopt a technology that is produced in a NATO country, or if we have to supply technology to something that a NATO ally could use, I think we will have to think of the element of supply chain sanity or sanitization very acutely. At least I can give an example of what's happening in India. After a lot of effort, we have finally recognized the challenge of components that could have embedded risks in them from certain geographies of concern for, and luckily relatively common for the world at this point in time. So that sanitization of looking under the hood of what we are receiving as hardware is something which has become very common. In a way, I would say US led the charge on that when they did something called Section 848 in their National Defense Authorizations Act, where components of a certain category, particularly the ones that deal with data or intelligence, were screened and sanitized in everything they adopt for drones, particularly, to be not of origin from some of these countries. So that's one part. And doing that, looking under the hood deeply, is very critical. And then the other element to it is the sovereign autonomy of the tech, so that you can retain the ability to do with it as you want to do for your country. So I think that's another important vector there. The second part of data collaboration is, of course, the standards on which you work. Now, standards with which data collaboration moves at different paces and has different contexts in different alliances. For example, NATO has its STANAG standards for data sharing and many parts of work. Now, adopting to it wherever it's already there and it's useful could be one way of collaborating seamlessly. It will have to depend on whether we have visibility of that a particular standard or not in the open domain, or if it can be shared under certain collaborative agreements. So that is one way. The second path, of course, is that in certain technologies and the way things are changing, we will have to evolve those standards rapidly. And therefore, we can also look at the commercial world. And commercial world now, given that data security is equally critical in the commercial side as well, we can look at standards thereof to adopt into the military domain if possible, because we are talking increasingly about using commercial systems into the military domain because they iterate and evolve way faster than systems iterate in the defense world. Also, there is an element of, you can say, cost that is now coming into picture in a very big way related to most of these systems. And because cost of a defense specific system can be pretty high, the attritability of that asset sometimes demands that you adopt technology from the commercial domain, because the volumes are already larger and it can be built in much larger numbers, more inexpensively. So that's the other part that's going to happen. But otherwise, I think one will have to look at what aggregated level information can be shared, or at what specific domain does that information become safe to share, because it cannot be the deeper insight that each country or each alliance wants to protect is not visible in that data when it is shared. So I think that test of not being able to calculate information you don't want to share back is going to become an important test anytime a data sharing mechanism is discussed, that from whatever data is given, exchanged, things you do not want people to know should not be retraced back from other elements. So all of this is now possible because we have so many systems that can test for these things. And I see collaboration on data and technology as less of a challenge, as long as we are willing to put the work that is required to sanitize things in the right way. And we have now AI to help us.
Ankit, I think you touched on some very important points, so I do have some follow-up questions. You spoke about trust, and that's such an important element, whether it's a private company working with companies across the world, or it's countries. If I were to ask you to de-jargonize trust for me and what it means for you in this space, would love to hear a few points. And also, you spoke about standardization, and I think this is something that we grapple with across the board. I'm reminded of the Hiroshima AI principles that a lot of us have signed up to for transparency. What does, thank you, Sven. What do standards or effective cooperation on standards mean here, and what are the institutional bodies or mechanisms? Are they adequate to deal with the kind of conversations that we're having around standards and AI today?
So I'll answer the second question first. I think a lot of very exciting development is happening. For example, in India, we are developing a public utility sorts called DEPA. And what it is doing is it is attempting to take or marry the information that certain segments, industries, even customers may have, individuals also may have, that somebody wants to leverage to build an AI solution, let's say. And what it is doing is it is creating an environment where this data can be shared on certain agreed upon principles and can be leveraged while the data is or the output is traceable. If there is a benefit, that benefit is traceable back to the origin, and it can create an environment where you can essentially limit what people can do with your data, as well as it allows you to share it without feeling like something unforeseen will happen to you. I mean, of course, something unforeseen can still happen, but it's a method of arriving at what we are comfortable with today. So I think there are developments happening where data sharing and approaches of two elements of, one, no security risk emanating from the data sharing, and also from no economic loss happening due to sharing or scraping of data. I think both of these things will be taken care of in the future. So I think we will have to come up with creative mechanisms that allow us to share data more openly, because without data we will not have effective AI. But at the same time, having no method of controlling it is also a problem, because people work really hard to create original content, like she did on the AI law. But at the same time, it is difficult for the system to move forward at the pace at which it desires to, without learning from it and building the next iteration faster, right? So that's one part. And on the other part around standards, I think we are also there are a lot of mechanisms that exist. There are a lot of mechanisms that exist. In the commercial world, you have alliances like the USB alliance, or you have alliances like the ONWIF protocol. So there are many protocols that people work on. So there is enough evidence that this can be done collectively. It does take a lot of back and forth. It does take investments. But the commercial world has figured this out reasonably well, and that's how you will see a lot of cross-collaborating capabilities. Even like, for example, the slot that a PCIe card, that PCIe slot is a standard that, a group of businesses and, regulatory bodies have come together and defined that, okay, this will be the standard we can build on next. So that a lot more people can build for it, and therefore there can be diffusion of technology, customers benefit, etc. So those are a couple of quick responses that I have on that.
Thank you, Ankit. I'm conscious that Wiebke has to leave, so I will. So before I come to you, Sophie, I just wanted to get a quick note from you, Wiebke. So we have a lot of young people in the room who definitely aspire to have the kind of career that you had at this age. I was wondering if you have any top tips for them or skills that they need to acquire to be there.
Thank you, and sorry, I just need to attend a dinner that already started 20 minutes ago, and I still need to get there, so I'm sorry to leave a little bit early, but I think what is most important, and was always most important for me, is to know why I do certain things. If I'm passionate about a topic, then I can learn so much more about it, and if I know why I'm doing certain things, it makes so much more sense to do it, and I can pour my heart and my soul into it. And if I then know why I'm doing it, I also know what to do. And if then you say what you want to do, you'll get to the positions. I never got elected the youngest group leader in Germany because I was just sitting there. No, I asked for it and I ran for it. And I think to have agency and to take agency and to just do whatever you want to do and ask for things that you want to have, that is the most important thing. So I know why you want to do something and then try to run for everything that you need to run for.
Sophie, if I can come to you. So, well, I'm conscious that NATO has, of course, 32 countries, and it's very and every country would have its different opinions about AI and how progressive they are on it versus, whether they want to be more restrained. In your line of work, how challenging has it been to translate AI capabilities into policy language across NATO? Have you seen some opportunities there? What are the key points of collaboration? And what have been some of the challenges you faced?
Thank you for this question, and it allows me to tell you a little bit more about what NATO does in terms of technology in general. This is actually a relatively new area for NATO to look at, but we're looking at it very actively. We're looking at artificial intelligence, of course, but we're also looking at technologies like quantum, like biotech, and others. This is all available online for those who are interested. We have written policies about it available online. And these are what we call emerging disruptive technologies. Why do we use that term? Because we think that they can be opportunities, but there are also challenges, and we see clearly security implications. And we are, as we have explained before, a security organization, political and military. So the way we look at these technologies and AI is through security. For example, what does that mean for our military in terms of the precision of strikes? What does it mean in terms of training for the way you wage warfare? What does it mean when it comes to Ukraine at the moment, which is our battlefield in Europe, where we see a lot of that happening? I was listening at the Raisina dialogue to the US space commander, who was talking about the possibility of having in the future, or in the near future actually, space data centers, and having the military having to protect potentially those centers and the commercial things happening in space. So all of our militaries are grappling with those questions. This is a fast evolving environment. So we have a NATO command structure that looks at the future of warfare that is located in the US. So that is actively looking at that, and what does that mean for our capabilities? What is the sort of equipment we need to have to be future-proof? And also, can AI help us in the procurement of our equipment? We know that it can take a long time to go through the motion of the different requirements you need to have. Procurement can be sometimes a bit slow in defense industry. Can AI help us in that regard? So there's a lot of, as you can see, links between AI and security, and we're trying to look at that. Now, NATO is a platform of 32 countries. What we do is, whenever we have an issue, we sit down with the delegates of the 32 countries, and we try to come to a common definition, to a common understanding, to see where there could be differences, and always to try to come to a compromise. That is the role of diplomacy, of multilateralism, and where I work in the international staff, and where my colleague Pietro, who spoke at the panel before, works as well. This is our job, to facilitate a compromise. So in the space of AI and technology in general, this is something that we're doing quite a lot within NATO, with the 32 countries, facilitated by the international staff. But this is also something that we're trying to look at from a partnership point of view. So we discussed earlier that we have 4 Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, and Korea. And they're highly advanced, capable partners with a lot lot of technology and lots of innovation happening, including in the defense industry. So we're trying to exchange more to understand what is their experience, what is our experience. This is what we call exchanges, best practices. So with the IP4, we try to increasingly do cooperation and dialogue on AI and innovation in general. The EU are very important partner in Europe, our unique and essential partner. This is also something we're discussing with the EU and Ukraine, because as I said before, Ukraine is the country in Europe and one of the and in the world as well that is every day going through a war where innovation has such a central role. So we have created a center between NATO and Ukraine to look at the lessons learned from the battlefield in Ukraine. So that is very important. My final word is on India, if there's space for dialogue between NATO and India on that. I would believe so. I think it could be interesting for India to learn more about what NATO does in the field of technology, just like it would be interesting for NATO to understand more about what India does. I think this requires to have dialogue at different levels, coming to the region. So it's great to be in India now, hosting delegations at our headquarters, working on the parliamentary side as well through our NATO parliamentary colleagues, but also the academic community in our countries and in India to build trust, to have those exchanges of best practices. And I think we can also build on the fact that, this momentum created with the EU-India strengthened cooperation, the AI summit that India just hosted, France hosting the previous edition. So I think there is potential to do more, and what we need to start with is more dialogue, and innovation and AI can also be, I think, an area where we can have that dialogue.
Thank you, Sophie. Just one follow-up question, if I may. So, for example, Salesforce has also done a few AI literacy programs, especially with parliamentarians and legislators. And we often find that to be quite rewarding because we often forget about the MPs, the members of parliament, who actually need to be equipped to legislate. And I was wondering if there's, how would you look at AI literacy when it comes to NATO? Because they're increasingly looking at very sensitive areas of regulation. And how do you ensure that all parliamentarians are on the same page when they're legislating on something like this? Is it through formal mechanisms, through cooperation, some of the dialogues that you've spoken about? Or do you find that other mechanisms might be more useful?
I think it's an interesting question. I think we're only at the beginning of a long journey. And I will let Sven speak about maybe the parliamentary side, but I have the feeling we're like today in 2026, just like we were in 1995 when it was the very first days of internet, and you had those big computers, only one per in your house, and you had to choose either to make a phone call or use the internet because the two systems would not be together. So I think we're at the beginning. I think that there is there's still a reflection to have, I think, on how AI can also help us in our everyday work, noting that we're also working on in a sensitive sector as well. I think it's also a question of generation, as it was spoken before. So I think whatever we do should always be complemented by the old-fashioned, I would say, type of intelligence. And in the work of diplomacy, it means sitting, having a face-to-face dialogue, having those human interactions, trying to understand what is the red line of my interlocutor versus what is mine, where there can be that common ground. And with AI enabling all of what we are discussing, but not replacing what we're discussing. So I think the essence of diplomacy will remain that we have those face-to-face interactions. And on top of this, we will have AI to help us to look at the opportunities and the challenges, including in the security sector.
Thank you, Sophie. Sven.
Yeah, very briefly, because you mentioned AI literacy of MPs. And look, I'm not the youngest MP anymore. When I got elected first, I was the youngest MP in Luxembourg Parliament, which also shows that MPs tend to age one legislation after the other. But maybe just why did I get chosen? Well, Sophie can tell you why I got chosen to speak here. Probably because I was the youngest member of the delegation to show up, and I have a tech background. So that was probably the conclusion of that. But when it comes to MPs in general, and I don't mean anything by it, there are older MPs who are very tech savvy, but just look at the average age of parliamentarians across the world. Not singling out any individual country, the average age of parliamentarians across the world still way above 60. So you're going to the IPU website, you will find it out in detail. You will also see for the International Women's Day that there are not enough women in parliament, so if there are any motivated young women here run for office, it's challenge us to lose our seats because we need it. But we also need younger people to run for parliament. It's very difficult, but in the end it's well worth it because we need that dynamism and also the literacy of the new technologies in parliament. To a certain extent, we can learn, but then to a certain extent, we also need to live it. And if we don't have the lived reality represented in parliaments, it's very difficult. So that's why I'm always advocating for more tech people entering politics, believing in democracy, because that's what matters. And when it comes to tech literacy in general, I'll just give you an example. So we have committee meetings almost every day in Parliament, and there is not one day per week where not at least one of my colleagues asks me to debug some problem on their computer. And it's rarely, how do I prompt ChatGPT or Anthropic or Gemini better? It is, Sven, I can't open this Word document. Can you help me? So I mentioned earlier, 4 in 5 people are not yet using AI. The majority of the people that have used AI until now use it to replace their search engine. They are not using it to generate new things. They are just using it to find stuff they could find much easier online if they were just using their human brain and Google. Would cost less energy because AI is very power hungry. I think that has been mentioned. And maybe just one number to keep in mind when you're talking about the energy of AI. A human brain uses on average 20 watts of power, well, energy. A GPU used to power any request in the AI world is about 1,000 kilowatts. So 1 minute of AI use is more than 1 hour of your brain power. So maybe we should also keep in mind to use our own brains sometimes instead of relying on some artificial brain, which is more expensive and to a certain extent is still not used to the extent that it could be used. So let's train people to use it correctly, but especially let's get more tech-savvy people to use it and also to legislate it.
Thank you for your wise words of advice. And on that note, actually, we're coming up on time, so I will give the reflection back to the panelists for a quick 60-second reflection on what the young people in the room should prioritize if they're going to have a career in the intersection of innovation, security, politics. What are the top skills?
I think at this point in time, passion, I would say. The most important thing is passion. Like Vivi had said earlier, that it's the passion and the desire to do something. I think if I have to say anything to what young people should be doing, like discovering passion, I think it's a very difficult thing, and discovering passion and then pursuing it aggressively.
Sophie?
Maybe a little bit along the lines of what I said earlier. I think it should be the right mix of passion, for sure, but also an innovation, embracing technology, but also not forgetting about the basic means of communication and the human interactions. I think this remains essential, and if we have that, I think this is how we will use in a better way all the AI and all the innovation we've been talking about. So I am also a true believer of, especially in the world of diplomacy, of human interactions enhanced by technology.
Dare to be different, dare to try things that everybody tells you will not work out, dare to try things that have failed in the past. It might be that it was just the wrong person or at the wrong time that they tried to do it. So just dare, because every innovation starts with somebody using his 20 watts of power to challenge the collective wisdom of gigawatts of power. And that's why it matters that you dare to find your passion, right? That's the motivation. Why am I doing it? Wiebke said it. Why am I doing something? What is my goal? But you can have the loftiest goals in the world. If you're not taking the first step, nothing will change. And it's exactly there where you need to start. You can have very little ambition, but by moving, you will change more than somebody who has a lot of ambition, but is afraid of taking the first step. So I challenge you all tonight. Use your 20 watts and dare to use them to the best extent that is possible, because that can change the world much faster than just using it to type new prompts into ChatGPT. Thank you.
So dare to dream, dare to take the first step. And we'll open it up to to questions. We have about 5 minutes, so I'll compound some questions together. Let me start with this side. The gentleman at the back in the gray coat. I want to say gray. Greenish. Green, okay.
So I was taking forward on the first move. Thank you for the advice. My name is László Szepesi. I am from Romania. I am studying at ISB, like MBA candidate. And I have to tell you that last year, it was a shocking experience to see what's happened in the elections in Romania or in Moldova. And like just for a summary or takeaway, what do you think in general then? How can we build a system in the NATO countries and India where we still can create space for innovation, but we still can defend the human rights, data, and this whole system, democracies against third-party infiltration?
Thank you. The lady next to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening to the distinguished panel. I'm Stuti Srivastav, and my question is towards Mr. Sven. So, as we are seeing that there is a moral devolution of diplomacy in the world, as well as scholars' claims. So, and we are also seeing that there is sudden rise of AI, which is eroding trust not only between the countries but also between the peoples. So, my question is, what relevance do you see of these parliamentary delegations in bridging this gap? So, thank you so much.
Yes, blue, in the blue coat.
Hi, my name is Sachin Singh. I work for a US-based geopolitical risk consultancy. My question is to our European guests here. Europe and US are basically the two pillars of NATO, right? And in the recent past, we have seen growing policy differences between the transatlantic partners, especially with the use of technology regulation. I mean, the latest saga between the US government and Anthropic shows their approach to the use of AI in military. And then on the other hand, we have the EU AI Act with its risk-based approach, right? So my question is, given the kind of threats that the United States has given to the EU in terms of its regulations, be it not allowing the US companies to follow the EU AI Act, or just like threatening to retaliate in the trade domain, will the Europe, or even let me rephrase this question, can Europe stand up to the United States when it comes to that? And or will it have to continue to capitulate to US demands when it comes to technology regulations, as we have seen on the issue of defense spending? Thank you.
Tough question. On this side, please. Can I have, yeah.
Me? Right. Thank you. Hello, my name is Aruna, and I work as a senior cybersecurity engineer with one of the German defense manufacturing company based in Munich. And my question is, in today's geopolitical landscape, cyber capabilities and software supply chain have become strategic assets. And many countries, including India, heavily rely on foreign technology ecosystems such as cloud platforms, operating systems, and core software infrastructure, right? So in a scenario where geopolitical tensions escalate and access to these ecosystems becomes restricted or disrupted, how can nations like India ensure the resilience and continuity of critical infrastructure like banking, aviation, and telecommunication while still maintaining international technological collaboration? Thanks.
Thank you. Can I have one more question from the back? Yes.
Thank you. My question is to the entire panel here. OpenAI has expressed interest in partnering with NATO, especially on the grounds of unclassified military data. So, how might deploying a US-based tech organization on NATO networks affect data sovereignty, especially for very European allies that fear basically an over-reliance on American tech giants entering to the EU market? Thank you.
Definitely not going to answer that. Ankit, can I come to you first? There was a question on cyber and software supply chains and how can we build resilience. Can I ask you to have a go at that?
I think insofar as cybersecurity is concerned, like I said earlier, sanitization, investigation on the current known threats, what is usually referred when you look at software pieces, VAPT, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. So evolving those standards and complying to that is perhaps the only way I can imagine at this point in time where you can be confident that what you're getting to deliver or what you're receiving is secure enough. But I have to forewarn that everything of this nature comes with limitations because the threats are evolving and you can check for all known threats, but the unknown threats become a difficult part. So to some extent, you can rely on a certain method, but beyond that, you have to look at the partner and their, where it is coming from is going to be equally important moving forward. And there are some really crazy attempts that have been made on even open source systems to sabotage and get backdoors into other people's systems. So I think you will have to look at where what is coming from and make sure that that is secure, as well as you do your basic checks that are necessary to get something on board.
Thank you. Sophie, Sven, some very interesting questions there. So I'll leave it to either of you to answer the, can EU stand up to the US? What about the dominance of US companies, OpenAI and NATO relationship? And also, how do you build a space for innovation, but also respect human rights?
I think here we need to distinguish the fact, two things. Europe can be the EU, it can be NATO, but here, if you're talking about innovation as such, without the security implications, then you talking about the EU, I would say. And there, between the EU and the US, there has been a Trade and Technology Council, a platform going on for some time now to talk about those issues. Now, as it has been explained before by the co-panelists, the EU has taken its own approach to AI with the act that we talked about, putting the emphasis also on regulations, while trying to still foster innovation. And we've talked about before how a fine line it can be between having the two. So I think that's the first comment I wanted to make. The other comment is that, on OpenAI and NATO, I think just like for any other topics, actually, should there be any worries between, the NATO members, we have a platform, we have 70 years of experience of talking to each other. So this is also the role of the international staff. If there are disagreements or there can be tensions, to use skillful diplomacy behind the scenes to resolve any issue we may have. We will see where we go on that issue, but I'm confident that we will find a way to come forward with that. Should we have any disagreements on that particular topic?
I will try to be very brief and take the questions by order, because I know the answer is the last thing that stands between you and dinner. So I'll be brief on this info and diplomacy and collaboration amongst the delegations. I think the important thing is, against this info, it always happened. People still believe that we never landed on the moon. People still believe that there are very bad things in vaccines. People believe that we can control the weather. All of that has existed for decades, probably far longer. The difference is the scale and the speed. So 30 years ago, everybody who went to a bar one evening knew that starting at some point at the night, there was one crazy dude in the corner spewing all those crazy conspiracy ideas. And at some point, the barman just told him, look, it's now time to go home and nobody wants to listen to you. Nowadays, they go on the internet and they find each other and they believe that they are right because there are other people believing the same crazy stuff that they are believing in. And then they are multiplying that on different platforms. So what helps against this info is media literacy. Know your sources, know how to access trusted advice, and then meeting the people in person. Because what I learned is that people tend to write very crazy stuff online, and then when you meet them in person and you challenge them, in reality, they are that high. Those are normally not the guys that are looking for a fight offline. They're just looking to troll you online. So a lot of the disinfo campaigns can be treated by meeting in person. Also in diplomacy, I'm not getting on a plane to India for fun or because the weather here was colder than at home. Honestly, it was a bit hot in a suit. But in the end, It matters because we meet people, we talk to each other face to face, we exchange phone numbers. And so if there's a threat, if there's a discussion, I can take a phone, WhatsApp a person, and I know that there's a real person at the other end. And that's why that diplomacy, that parliamentary diplomacy also matters. On can the EU stand up to the US? Well, I don't believe in the story that you are telling us that it's only the EU regulating tech and the US is doing nothing to protect their own market. In the end, every EU company working in the US has to abide by US standards. Every company exporting to India has to abide by Indian standards. And every company trying to do business in the EU needs to abide by European standards. Period. That's how the WTO was set up and how the WTO should work. Now, might doesn't make right. I think that's a very important sentence in a rules-based international order. We all know that it's not as easy, it's not as black and white, but I don't believe the story I read on the news every day to say it's only the EU regulating stuff. We've seen analyses from think tanks that show that especially in the defense sector, the US has far more regulations, amongst other things on exports, what can be used, which tools can be used than the EU. All the US companies are working in the EU tech sector and defense tech sector. Almost none of the European actors is playing a role in the US tech sector. So maybe they are right in one way, but we are also right in the other way, and I believe we need to just insist on that, and then on the trade balance, it should balance out. And then the final question was on OpenAI and unclassified data. Well, they scraped the whole freaking internet. So they already know everything that is unclassified anyway. Would I prefer that to be another company for European unclassified data? Yeah, for sure. But then we need to create it. Then somebody needs to dare and create that company and launch it, and we need to find the capital for it. But in the end, if it's unclassified, the AI companies already know it, because to be honest, and Sophie mentioned it, most of the stuff NATO does is public knowledge, it's on the website. The only thing is, we make it sometimes very hard to find. So probably it's more a question of discoverability than of whether it's public or not. So I'm not too concerned about OpenAI working on unclassified data, because let me tell you one story. Most EU governments, you know which AI they are using? And they share all their data with that AI? Microsoft Copilot. And you know why? Because they are using Microsoft Office, and it was bundled. And so for some reason, it was already on the computer, so most governments accepted it. With one exception maybe, and I'm very happy that the Dutch delegation is so strong today, because the Dutch actually were the only country in Europe that did the proper privacy assessment of Microsoft 365 and forbade most of its users because of security and privacy risks. All the other 26 EU member states just said, oh yeah, we read the license. Well, they clicked on the button that they accepted the license. Whether they read it, I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for your energy, and a round of applause for the panelists, please.